The room had already decided who Julian Carter was before he ever spoke a word. 30 seconds after he stepped through the glass doors of the Franklin Academy Scholarship Gala, conversations softened, expensive watches stopped moving, and a few guests exchanged the same quiet look people shared when they believed they understood someone completely. A man in a faded navy jacket, carrying a handmade card from his 9-year-old daughter, did not look like he belonged beneath the crystal lights and polished marble floors. He looked like someone who had taken a wrong turn. Julian noticed the glances, but he did not let them reach his face. He simply adjusted the small envelope in his hand, checked that his daughter's drawing was still inside, and walked forward with the calm of a man who had nothing to prove. Near the center of the ballroom, Evelyn Whitmore watched him approach the registration table. She was surrounded by board members, donors, and parents whose names appeared regularly in newspapers. Her expression changed slightly when she saw the name on his invitation. "Mr. Carter?" she asked, looking from the paper to him. "Yes, ma'am," Julian answered quietly. "I'm here with my daughter, Mia." Evelyn glanced toward the crowd, then back at him. "I believe this event is for scholarship sponsors, families of recipients, and invited guests." Her voice was polite, but the meaning behind it was clear. Several people nearby turned their attention toward them. Julian did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He simply looked down at the envelope in his hand and carefully placed it on the table. "I understand," he said. "I just wanted to make sure Mia's drawing reached the right person." That answer seemed to surprise her more than anger would have. "A drawing?" Evelyn repeated. Julian nodded. "She spent 3 nights working on it. She said the children receiving these scholarships should know someone believes in them." For a moment, the noise of the room faded. Then one of the donors behind Evelyn gave a small, uncomfortable laugh. "That's thoughtful, but this is a pretty important evening. Maybe the family reception is in another room." The words landed gently, which somehow made them heavier. Julian looked around at the people watching him. He saw the curiosity, the assumptions, the quiet judgment. He had seen that expression before, not just tonight, but in different places and different forms. He reached for the envelope again, but before he could leave, a young volunteer accidentally dropped a stack of scholarship files near the table. Papers scattered across the floor. Julian immediately crouched down to help gather them. One document caught his eye for less than a second before he placed it back with the others. It was a page with a familiar signature at the bottom. His hand paused, not long enough for anyone else to notice, but long enough to raise a question. Why would that name be here? Julian stood and handed the files back to the volunteer. "Thank you," the young woman said. Most people would have just walked away. Julian gave a small smile. Someone should always pick things up when they fall. Then he turned toward the exit, believing the moment was over. But behind him, Dr. Nathan Brooks, the school's longtime principal, had seen the document on the floor. He looked at Julian's back, then at the signature on the page, and the color slowly left his face. Because the man everyone in that room had mistaken for just another single father was connected to a secret the entire academy had built its future upon. Julian Carter woke up every morning at 5:15 before the alarm on his nightstand had the chance to ring. It was not because he enjoyed waking early. It was because there were small responsibilities waiting for him that nobody else would see. In the quiet apartment above a small neighborhood bakery, he moved through the kitchen without turning on the bright overhead light, preparing breakfast while the city outside slowly came alive. He packed Mia's lunch with the same care he used every day, cutting her apple slices evenly because she always noticed when one piece was larger than the others. On the refrigerator door was a collection of drawings held up by magnets, most of them made with colorful markers and the unstoppable confidence of a child who believed every idea deserved to exist. One drawing was different. It was the one she had carried to the gala. A simple picture of children standing beneath a large tree with the words, "Everyone deserves a chance," written carefully across the top. Julian had almost told her not to bring it. He knew rooms like the Franklin Academy Gala. He knew what happened when people entered places where they were not expected. But Mia had looked at him and asked a question he could not ignore. "Daddy, if someone helps children but nobody thanks them, does it still matter?" Julian had stopped tying his shoes when she said that. Because somehow, his daughter had understood something that many adults spent their entire lives forgetting. That morning, as he watched her finish her cereal and carefully place her spoon in the sink, he noticed the same small habit she had developed after losing her mother. She always looked back before leaving a room, as if making sure the people she loved were still there. "You were quiet last night," Mia said, adjusting the strap on her backpack. Julian smiled slightly. "Was I?" She nodded. "You get quiet when people make you feel small." The word stayed with him longer than he expected, because Mia had seen something he tried to hide. Not anger, not embarrassment, something deeper. The exhaustion of always having to prove that kindness had value even when nobody applauded it. Before they left, Julian opened the drawer beside the kitchen table to grab his keys. Inside was a small silver card holder he rarely touched. He paused when he saw it. The edge of an old photograph was visible beneath a stack of receipts. He gently pushed it back into place. Some memories were not painful because they were forgotten. They were painful because they still mattered. At Franklin Academy, the morning after the gala began with unusual energy. Teachers whispered in hallways. Board members gathered behind closed doors. A question had spread throughout the school before breakfast had even ended. Who exactly was Julian Carter? Dr. Nathan Brooks had spent most of the night reviewing old records, searching for an answer to something that should have been impossible. The signature he saw on that document belonged to someone who had not attended a public event in years. Someone who had intentionally disappeared from recognition. But one question bothered him more than anything else. Why would a man who had created something so important choose to live like nobody knew his name? Meanwhile, Evelyn Whitmore sat in her office, staring at the guest list from the previous evening. She had replayed the moment in her mind more times than she wanted to admit. Not because Julian had embarrassed her. He had not. That was what unsettled her. He had walked away without resentment, without demanding respect, without trying to make anyone feel guilty. And somehow, that made her feel more uncomfortable than anger would have. Then her assistant entered carrying a thin folder that had been delivered that morning. "This was requested from the archive department," she said. "They said you needed to see it immediately." Evelyn opened the folder expecting another routine scholarship report. Instead, she saw a name written across the first page that made her stop breathing for a moment. Not because she recognized Julian Carter, but because she recognized the person who had been protecting his secret for years. The folder in Evelyn Whitmore's hands contained a name she never expected to see connected to Julian Carter. She turned the first page again, hoping she had misunderstood what she was reading. But the signature was still there, written beneath the founding agreement of the Franklin Academy Opportunity Fund, the same fund that had paid tuition for hundreds of students over the last decade. The same fund everyone praised during the gala. The same fund whose founder had never appeared on stage. Before Evelyn could process it, her assistant placed another message on her desk. The scholarship committee needed an emergency decision. A student had lost their transportation support after a funding error, and the family needed an answer before the school day ended. Evelyn looked at the file, then at the note. Normally, she would send someone else to handle it. But something about Julian's quiet expression from the night before stayed in her mind. She needed to understand the man behind the name. Across town, Julian was facing a different choice. Mia's school counselor had called him after noticing a mistake in the scholarship records. A younger student named Caleb had been accidentally removed from a program because his family had submitted one document late. Julian arrived at the school office expecting a simple correction. Instead, he found a nervous mother sitting beside her son, holding a folder filled with paperwork and apologizing repeatedly for something she could not control. The administrator explained that the system had rules, and exceptions were difficult. Julian listened carefully. Then he did something unexpected. He took out his own prepared paperwork for the gala follow-up meeting and placed it back into his bag. The document contained information that could have immediately revealed his connection to the scholarship fund. If he presented it, people would listen. Doors would open. The misunderstanding from the gala would disappear. But Caleb would still be sitting there feeling like he was the reason his family was struggling. Julian looked at the boy and made his decision. "Fix his application first," Julian said calmly. "We can talk about mine later." The administrator stared at him. "Mr. Carter, your situation is different. This could affect your meeting with the board." Julian simply nodded. A child waiting for help should not have to wait because an adult wants to be recognized. The sentence was heard by someone standing near the office doorway. Evelyn had arrived moments earlier. She had followed the address from the school records because she wanted answers, but now she found herself watching a man who had every reason to reveal his importance and chose not to. It confused her. People who had influence usually protected it. People who had power usually made sure others knew. Julian seemed to do the opposite. Yet Evelyn still hesitated. Kindness could be genuine, but she had learned that appearances could also hide carefully prepared intentions. She watched as Julian helped the administrator organize the missing documents, never once mentioning his own connection to the fund. Then she noticed something else. The way he reviewed the paperwork was not the way an ordinary parent would. He did not skim. He studied every detail. Dates, signatures, funding codes, a skill developed through years of experience. When Julian finally stepped away from the desk, the administrator looked at the papers and froze. "Mr. Carter," she whispered, "where did you learn to read these agreements?" Julian looked toward Mia, who was waiting in the hallway with her backpack. Before he answered, his phone began ringing. The name on the screen made his expression change for the first time. It was a person he had not spoken to in 11 years. And when Evelyn saw that name appear, she realized the secret surrounding Julian Carter was much larger than a scholarship fund. Julian did not answer the phone immediately. He stared at the name on the screen while the school hallway continued moving around him. Teachers walked past carrying folders, students laughed near the lockers, and Mia stood a few feet away, quietly watching her father. She knew that expression. It was the one he wore when something from his past had found its way into the present. Finally, Julian answered. "Hello, Daniel." The voice on the other end was tense. "Julian, we have a problem. Someone discovered the original donor agreement." Julian's eyes moved toward the scholarship office window. Who discovered it? There was a pause. The board. That single word changed everything. Within an hour, Franklin Academy went from celebrating its scholarship program to questioning it. The board members called an emergency meeting after receiving documents that appeared to show irregularities in the foundation records. Evelyn Whitmore arrived at the conference room expecting answers, but instead she found a group of people already forming opinions. The same people who had praised the scholarship fund the night before were now asking why its founder had remained hidden. "A hidden donor creates questions," one board member said, "especially when millions of dollars are involved." Evelyn looked at the documents spread across the table. Something bothered her. The accusations were not matching the man she had seen at the school office. A person trying to manipulate a system would not quietly give up recognition to help a child he did not know. But facts on paper had a way of creating doubt before the truth had a chance to speak. Meanwhile, Julian was asked to come to the meeting, not as the founder, not as the person who had created opportunities for hundreds of students. He was invited as someone who needed to explain himself. Mia held his hand before he entered the building. "Are you in trouble?" she asked. Julian looked at her and smiled gently. "Sometimes people get confused before they understand." "Does that happen to you a lot?" she asked. The question stayed with him because she already knew the answer. Inside the conference room, Julian placed a worn leather folder on the table. He had carried it for years, but rarely opened it. The folder contained the original agreement, letters from families who had received help, and a handwritten note from his late wife about why they started the fund. Evelyn noticed his hand resting on the folder, but not opening it. She wondered why. Why would someone protect a secret for so long if revealing it could solve everything? Before Julian could explain, another person entered the room. A former financial consultant named Richard Hale. He had worked with the Academy years earlier and was now presenting himself as the person who discovered the alleged problem. He placed a copy of a document in front of the board. "The founder's identity was concealed intentionally," Richard said. "The question is why?" The room became quiet. Julian looked at the document and immediately recognized the signature at the bottom. It was not his. It was someone else's name using information only a few people should have known. Evelyn noticed the change in his expression. For the first time, she saw something beyond patience in Julian's eyes. Not anger, not fear, recognition. He knew exactly who had created the document. Then Richard spoke one final sentence that made everyone turn toward Julian. "If Mr. Carter has nothing to hide, perhaps he can explain why the foundation was never supposed to exist under his name." Julian slowly opened the leather folder. But before he revealed what was inside, his phone received a message from an unknown number. One sentence appeared on the screen, and it changed the entire direction of the meeting. "Do not tell them who you are until you know who betrayed you." Julian slowly placed his phone face down on the table, but the message remained in his mind. "Do not tell them who you are until you know who betrayed you." For years, he had protected the secret behind the Franklin Academy Opportunity Fund because he believed the work mattered more than the name attached to it. Now, for the first time, he wondered if someone had been protecting a different secret entirely. The room waited for him to speak. Richard Hale leaned back in his chair with the confidence of someone who believed he already controlled the outcome. "Mr. Carter, the board deserves transparency," he said, "especially when private agreements and financial decisions are involved." Julian looked at the documents in front of him. He did not rush. He turned each page carefully, noticing details most people would have missed. A change date, a missing reference number, a signature copied from an older agreement. Small things, almost invisible things, but they told a story. "This document was altered," Julian said quietly. The room shifted. Richard immediately responded. "That is a serious accusation." Julian looked up. "No, it is a serious mistake." Evelyn watched him closely. The man she had seen carrying his daughter's drawing into a room where he was not expected was now examining financial records with complete confidence. Yet he still refused to explain why he understood them so well. That question bothered her more than the documents themselves. "How would you know that?" she asked. Julian paused. He could have answered. He could have said that he helped build the system they were reviewing. He could have ended the doubt in seconds. Instead, he looked toward the window where students were walking across the courtyard. "Because I know what the original agreement was meant to protect," he said. That answer created another silence. Not because it explained everything, because it revealed there was much more he was not saying. Dr. Nathan Brooks stepped forward and opened an old archive file from the school records. Inside was a letter dated 11 years earlier. The handwriting was familiar. Julian recognized it before anyone else did. It was from his wife, Claire. The letter was never meant for public eyes. She had written it during the first year they created the scholarship fund, before anyone knew its size or impact. Evelyn read the first few lines silently. Then her expression changed. The letter did not mention money. It did not mention influence. It mentioned a promise. A promise that no child should lose an opportunity simply because their parents could not afford the right doors. For the first time, Evelyn saw the difference between a hidden donor and a hidden purpose. But before she could ask Julian why he had disappeared from the foundation, Richard placed another file on the table. "There is still one problem," he said. "The original founder agreement lists 2 names." Everyone looked down. Julian's expression changed slightly, because he knew the second name. It was someone who had never been mentioned publicly, someone who had access to every decision, someone who could have changed everything without anyone noticing. Evelyn looked at Julian. "Who was the other founder?" she asked. Julian remained silent for several seconds. Then he reached for the folder he had carried all morning. Inside was the photograph he had hidden for years. And when he placed it on the table, every person in the room realized the secret was not only about who Julian Carter was. It was about why he had spent a decade making sure nobody ever found out. The photograph Julian Carter placed on the conference table changed the way everyone looked at the documents in front of them. It was not a picture of wealth, power, or influence. It was a simple photograph taken 11 years earlier in a small classroom, showing Julian and Claire standing beside a group of children holding their first scholarship certificates. On the back of the photograph was a handwritten note from Claire. "For the children who only need one person to believe in them." Evelyn read the words slowly, and something inside her certainty began to disappear. The man she had mistaken for, someone seeking attention, had spent years avoiding it. The man she thought needed to prove himself had built something that allowed others to succeed without ever knowing his name. Dr. Nathan Brooks opened the original foundation records from the archive. One by one, the pieces began falling into place. The reason Julian never attended public ceremonies. The reason his name was removed from announcements. The reason every scholarship letter focused on the students instead of the donors. But one question remained. Why was his name hidden from the beginning? Julian looked at the photograph before answering. Because Claire believed children should remember the opportunity, not the person who provided it. The room became silent. Even Richard Hale stopped preparing his response. But the silence did not last long. One board member pointed toward the altered documents on the table. "That still does not explain why someone changed the agreements." Julian nodded. He knew that was the question everyone needed answered. Instead of defending himself, he reached into his folder and removed a small collection of receipts, letters, and archived reports. He placed them beside the financial documents Richard had presented. The difference was immediate. The original records showed a clear pattern. Every decision Julian made was connected to protecting the scholarship recipients. Every restriction was designed to prevent the fund from becoming a public display of generosity. Evelyn looked through the pages and noticed something unusual. The same person who had accused Julian of hiding information had signed several internal reviews approving the foundation's structure years earlier. Richard's signature appeared again and again. The room turned toward him. For the first time, he looked uncertain. "Those records are incomplete," Richard said quickly. Julian did not argue. He simply opened another file. Inside was a timeline showing every change made to the foundation documents, including the exact dates and approvals. The person who altered the records had not just changed numbers. They had changed the story of why the foundation existed. Evelyn looked at Julian with a different expression now. Not suspicion, confusion. She was trying to understand how someone could carry this much responsibility while living such a quiet life. Then her eyes moved to the final page in the folder. It was a letter addressed to Julian from Claire, written shortly before she passed away. Evelyn hesitated before reading it. Something about Julian's reaction told her the letter was not about money or the foundation. It was about a promise. A promise that explained why he had accepted being misunderstood for so many years. Before Evelyn could open the letter, Julian's phone rang again. This time, he answered immediately. The voice on the other end was from the legal department of the foundation. The emergency message was short. The board had discovered one final document, and if it was authentic, everything Julian had protected could be taken away. Julian closed his eyes for a moment, because he knew exactly which document they had found. It was the one secret he had never wanted anyone to see. The emergency message from the foundation's legal department left the room in silence. Julian did not explain immediately. He simply looked at the people around the table and understood something he had hoped would never happen. The secret he protected for years was no longer only his to carry. What document did they find? Dr. Nathan Brooks asked. Julian placed his phone down slowly. The trust agreement. Evelyn watched his expression carefully. She had expected fear. She had expected anger. Instead, she saw a man preparing himself for a difficult truth. Within minutes, the legal team connected to the foundation joined the meeting remotely. The document in question appeared on the screen. It was an agreement created years earlier that transferred control of the scholarship fund into a private trust. At first glance, it looked suspicious. The trust was connected to Julian. The final approval authority was listed under a name nobody recognized. The board members exchanged worried looks. Who was this person? One asked. Julian did not answer right away, because the answer would change the way everyone understood the entire foundation. Richard Hale leaned forward. This is exactly why transparency matters. Hidden names, private agreements, and unknown beneficiaries create risks. But his confidence weakened when the legal team displayed the original filing history. The trust was not created to control the money. It was created to protect the students if anything happened to Julian. Evelyn looked at Julian. You planned for the foundation to continue without you. Julian nodded. That was always the point. The statement changed the room again. The man everyone thought had hidden power had actually removed himself from it. But then the attorney revealed the remaining issue. The trust had one additional approval requirement. Any major change to the foundation required consent from the second founder. The person whose name appeared beside Julian's. The person nobody had mentioned. The person Richard had been searching for. Richard immediately asked for the name. The attorney hesitated. We need to confirm the identity before releasing it. Julian looked down at the table. For the first time, Evelyn noticed that the uncertainty was not about protecting himself. It was about protecting someone else. Why are you still protecting this person? Evelyn asked quietly. Julian looked at her. Because they trusted me. That answer created another question. Who was important enough that Julian Carter would risk his own reputation to keep their promise? Then Dr. Brooks noticed something on the trust agreement. A small handwritten mark in the corner. A symbol used on the earliest scholarship documents before the foundation became public. He remembered seeing it once before. Not on a business document. Not on a financial record. On a letter written by Claire. His eyes widened. Julian. He whispered. This was never about ownership, was it? Julian did not respond. He reached into his folder and removed the final sealed envelope he had carried since the beginning. The room watched as he placed it beside the trust agreement. Evelyn saw the date written across the front. It was from the same year the scholarship fund began. Richard looked at the envelope and suddenly became quiet, because he recognized the handwriting before anyone else did. And for the first time since the meeting began, Richard Hale looked less like a man exposing a secret and more like someone afraid that the truth was about to expose him. The sealed envelope sat in the center of the conference table, untouched for several seconds. Everyone in the room understood that whatever was inside could change the way they remembered everything that happened. Julian looked at the handwriting one more time before gently opening it. Inside was not a contract, not a financial record, not a legal document. It was a letter from Claire written 11 years earlier. If you are reading this, it means Julian tried to carry everything alone again. Dr. Nathan Brooks lowered his eyes. Evelyn quietly read the next lines as Julian held the paper steady. Claire had written about the beginning of the scholarship fund, but not from the perspective of a founder. She wrote as a mother who understood what it meant to worry about a child's future. She wrote about meeting families who were afraid to ask for help because they felt ashamed. She wrote that the greatest gift was not giving someone something they lacked, but reminding them they were never less worthy because they needed support. The room became still. The secret was no longer about money. It was about intention. Richard Hale looked at the letter and shifted in his chair. The confidence he carried earlier was gone, because the same documents he used to create suspicion now showed something different. Julian had never hidden the foundation to gain control. He had hidden himself to protect its purpose. The legal team continued reviewing the records. The altered agreements were traced back to changes made shortly before Richard began questioning the foundation. The timeline was clear. Someone had attempted to create doubt around Julian by changing the story behind the scholarship fund. But the final question remained. Why? Richard tried to defend himself. He explained that he was only concerned about protecting the academy, that he believed secrecy created unnecessary risks. Some board members listened. Others did not. Evelyn noticed the difference. Concern sounded different from accusation. A person trying to protect something asked questions. A person trying to replace the truth created confusion. Then the attorney displayed one final record on the screen. It showed that Richard had approved the original foundation structure years earlier. The same structure he was now calling suspicious. The room changed instantly. Not because someone shouted. Not because anyone demanded revenge. But because the truth had finally become impossible to ignore. Richard looked down at the table. For the first time, he had no explanation that could change what everyone had seen. Evelyn turned toward Julian. She remembered the moment at the gala when she thought he did not belong. She remembered the way he quietly placed his daughter's drawing on the table. She remembered assuming she understood him after seeing only a few seconds of his life. "I owe you an apology," she said. Julian looked at her, but he did not accept it immediately. Not because he wanted her to suffer, because he wanted the apology to mean something. The next person who walks into this room should not need a secret history before they are treated with respect, he said. The sentence stayed with everyone. The board voted to restore the original foundation records and remove the altered documents from consideration. The scholarship fund remained protected. The students who depended on it would never know how close their opportunities came to disappearing. But as the meeting ended, Dr. Brooks approached Julian with one final question. "There is still something I do not understand." Julian looked back at him. "What?" Dr. Brooks held the old photograph from years earlier. "Why did you never tell Mia the entire story?" Julian glanced through the glass doors toward his daughter waiting outside. His expression softened. Because the greatest secret he had protected was not about the foundation. It was about the promise he made to his daughter when she was too young to understand it. 3 weeks after the meeting that changed Franklin Academy forever, Julian Carter stood in the same hallway where he had once been treated like someone who did not belong. But this time, nobody looked away. The walls were still covered with student artwork. The same sunlight entered through the tall windows. The same sounds of children laughing filled the building. Yet everything felt different because the people inside had changed the way they saw him. Julian was not there for recognition. He was there because Mia had forgotten her science project in the classroom, and like every other morning, he had come to help her before the school day began. Some things mattered more to him than any ceremony. When Mia found him near the classroom door, she smiled and held up a small envelope. "This is for you," she said. Julian looked surprised. "What is it?" She shrugged. "You will see." Inside was the same drawing she had carried to the gala weeks earlier. The tree, the children, the words, "Everyone deserves a chance." But this time, beneath the picture, she had added something new. "My dad believes in people before they believe in themselves." Julian stared at the sentence for a moment. He did not say anything. He simply folded the paper carefully and placed it inside the same leather folder that had carried so many years of memories. Later that afternoon, Franklin Academy held a small gathering. Not a luxury event. Not a room filled with wealthy donors and polished speeches. Just students, teachers, parents, and families who had been touched by the scholarship program. Evelyn Whitmore stood before the crowd holding a microphone. Months earlier, she would have prepared every word perfectly. Today, she spoke differently. She admitted that she had judged Julian before understanding him. She admitted that she had mistaken a quiet life for a small life. But she did not make the moment about her apology. Instead, she introduced the students who had received opportunities because someone believed they deserved one. One by one, they shared stories. A student who became the first person in her family to attend college. A young musician who received lessons because of the program. A child who once thought his future was already decided. Julian stood near the back of the room, exactly where he had stood during the gala. But this time, nobody ignored him. Nobody wondered why he was there. Dr. Nathan Brooks walked over and handed him the original guest card from the night everything began. "You kept this?" Julian asked. Dr. Brooks smiled. "Because I knew one day people would understand what it meant." Julian looked at the card and remembered the moment Evelyn had asked if he belonged at the event. He remembered how easy it would have been to reveal everything, to correct everyone immediately. But if he had done that, they would have learned his name before they learned his heart. That was the difference. Later that evening, Julian and Mia sat at their kitchen table, just like they had countless times before. She finished her homework while he repaired the loose strap on her backpack. The same backpack she had carried to the gala. The same small detail that had reminded him why the scholarship existed in the first place. "Daddy," Mia asked, "are you happy people know the truth now?" Julian smiled and looked toward the window. Outside, the city moved quietly. "I am happy they learned something important," he said. "What?" she asked. He looked back at her. "That every person has a story you cannot see." Mia nodded as if that answer made perfect sense. Maybe to her, it did. Years later, people would remember the scholarship fund, the students it helped, and the changes it created. Some would remember Julian Carter's name. Others would remember the lesson behind it. But the person who mattered most to Julian never needed a public announcement or a room full of applause. She already knew who he was. She had known all along. Thank you for watching until the end of the video.